You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ask A Gettysburg Guide number 4. And once again, I am here with my buddy Bob Steenstra and Tim Smith as our guest guide.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, guys.
That was Bob. Tim wants to say hello, too.
Hello.
All right, let's start with some fun questions first. We'll get these out of the way. Soldier_up_ asks, what is the craziest paranormal experience you've had at Gettysburg?
Wow. I'm sure anybody knows me knows that I've never had a paranormal experience. Apparently, I don't have the ability to see ghosts.
Of course.
I always have a question, if you have friends that are, we call them, I don't know, ghost people, people that are more inclined to have experiences on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. But, I'm just a little confused about the rules of ghosts.
Oh, thank you, Tim. I am so glad you brought this up. Please go.
Well, I'm just curious, like, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
at the Trossel farm, we have all the dead horses in the photograph. Mm-hmm. Are there horse ghosts?
That's a great question. Because sometimes...
let's say yes.
Okay. There's that dog ghost.
Are there dog ghosts?
Barksdale's dog.
Okay. Are there groundhog ghosts? Are there amoeba ghosts? I'm curious about the rules. Can you haunt a place you died at, or can it be any place? Because, they say the Cashtown Inn is haunted, but... by generals, but they didn't die there. They died in Virginia. Can you haunt any place, or just say I have all these questions to the ghost people?
No, you know what I think there is? I think in the afterlife there is a travel agency, and you're allowed as a ghost to travel once or twice a year to your favorite place or wherever you want to go. Really, for example, I was part of a TV show years ago that the Travel Channel did, and it was haunted whatever. And we went to the Daniel Lady farm with I'm not going to say who, but a leading ghost tour person who brought a medium along. And she sat there on the bloodstained floor and channeled this person and his name is Trim. And then the ghost tour operator said, Trimble? And she said, yes, he's here. And he's, saying all this. But Trimble didn't die here, did he?
I guess you don't have to die at this spot.
That's my point. That's my point, is there's a travel agent and they're going to help you out. So there's plenty of rules. How about the sounds? Have you heard these stories of it? Do muskets have souls? And do they have ghosts?
How do you explain ghost sounds?
Yeah, how do you explain the sound of people that claim to hear battles?
That's all I want. I'm not going to be inclined to see or hear or any, have activity in my life, but I'd like to know, at least read the book on what is a rule, what the rules are, and then you can stay within the framework of the rules, and then I can understand them a little more.
I love that you're saying this, because I've always said the same thing. I do have a weird story, though. It wasn't on the battlefield. It was in an apartment I had. And very quickly, I woke up one morning about 7:30. My friend Pete was my roommate at the time, and I go to pee in the morning. Forgive me for being crass, but I go to pee and I hear the sound of a blow dryer, and the shower is bone dry. I didn't know Pete used a blow dryer, and I couldn't imagine what he's getting up at 7:30 in the morning for at that time to go so coiffed, to go to. So I get out of the bathroom and I still hear the blow dryer sound. It's not coming from his room because his door's open a crack, and I peek in and he's just dead to the world, passed out on the bed. This blow dryer sound is coming from the living room. So I go to the living room, and that previous weekend we had a friend from high school come down and visit, and we had an air mattress, and we had one of those electric pumps, right? Which, so we removed the air mattress from the living room, but, being bachelors, we only do half the cleanup. So we left the pump plugged into the wall, and its switch, it was like a regular toggle switch, was in the on position. And I thought, well, maybe my foot accidentally brushed it as I walked by. But the thing is, it wasn't in my path to get to the bathroom. So I still, to this day, don't blame that on a ghost.
You had a mouse walking through the air, and
maybe it was.
It off.
Yeah, I don't know. How about you, Bob? Did you have any weird experiences?
I've had no paranormal experiences on the battlefield. However, I have slept on the battlefield a whole bunch of times, and I've never had anything happen, but my students have. So back in the late 1990s and into the 2000s, we used to march our 120 to 150 students 11 miles from New Oxford to Gettysburg, dressed in blue and gray and having drums and Confederate and Union flags. And we would sleep at McMillan Woods Campground. Mm-hmm. This is part of a 2-day field trip where we're learning about what it's like to be a soldier. I would have a number of fellow licensed guides, rangers, reenactors come and talk to the kids about things. And the last thing we would do before tucking them into their tents at night was to have a ghost storyteller around the campfire at night. We always did this when the weather was the best in about the third week of September. And by that time, the acorns are dropping off of the trees and they're hitting the tin roof shelter where we would eat. And that sound would resonate. Right next to McMillan Woods Campground, just to the south, there's a very large farm. And one of the animals that they have there are peacocks. And peacocks, when they cry, sound like a demon or like a ghost.
Really?
So after the ghost stories, we took our kids into bed, and inevitably they would wake up hearing the acorns hitting the tin roof and hearing the peacocks and claiming that they were hearing gunfire and ghosts. No paranormal experiences for this guy here. Sorry. And I've tried, I've listened, but nothing.
Yeah.
I just think that, some people like me are not open to it, and other people who are open to it have more likelihood of, having an experience.
Well, yeah, because you want it to happen, so you're going to find a way to have an experience.
So that's all.
Yeah. All right. Mrs. Maestas 2, she says, Matt, were there any women disguised as men at Gettysburg?
That's an interesting question. There are several good books written on the subject. Well, the one good book is They Fought Like Demons. I forget the name of the author, but I believe she worked at the Library of Congress for a time. Deanna someone. It's coming to me. But, in the American Civil War, obviously, women were not allowed to be in Civil War regiments as a fighting soldier. It was against, if they found out, at the Battle of Antietam, there was a woman that was found to be wounded after the battle, and then she was discharged from the unit. So women had to disguise themselves as men. And some of them probably did it and were successful. But then what happens is, because they were disguised as men, their names are different on the muster rolls. And then basically what we have is accounts by women afterwards saying that, I was in the Battle of Gettysburg, as such and such. And how do you prove this kind of information? So there are stories here and there. There's a book called When a Rose is Not a Rose. I remember published about 20 years ago at Thomas Publications. And I looked in that book and I read it. And she had like 30 women at the Battle of Gettysburg, but it was very poorly researched. And some of the units that these people said they were in, there's such unit at the battle, and it was, when I looked at it, I was like, nope. Yeah. So you tell stories, but then when you go to prove the stories, it kind of information dissipates. It's almost like, have you ever heard the concept Black Confederates at Gettysburg?
Oh, yeah.
That's another concept where when you start delving into it, the evidence is sorely lacking. I mean, it's possible there were. And there are references. I think Bob was talking about one reference here to women being in the battle. But as far as actual women participating in the line of firing, we're really hard pressed to find, good source. There are women who are with the units and were on the battlefield with the unit, like how do you pronounce her name? Mary Tepe with the 114th Pennsylvania, French Mary. But didn't have a rifle. Annie Etheridge at 3rd Michigan. It doesn't have a rifle.
But their role isn't to fight, right?
No.
What is their role?
As a combat veteran, that's a different story.
But now, see, I kind of get the feeling that this women dressed as men thing, because I get these questions a lot. Like, people always ask about this, and I almost feel like it's the same thing as the people that have ghost experiences. Like they want to believe that there were 30 of them at the Battle of Gettysburg, but when it comes down to finding the proof of it, and there very well may have been
a few,
but we don't have the evidence to prove it. So right now, it's what, anecdotal at best, or what? I mean,
we have stories and anecdotes. I remember the one popular story, and off the top of my head, I don't know the source for it, but I do remember a popular story was that after Pickett's charge, a soldier was crying, and another soldier came up to him and said, what's the matter? And the soldier's crying described it, so-and-so was killed in the battle, and the guy was comforting the soldier, saying, yeah, I know, he's your good friend, but, people die in battle. And the soldier said, no, you don't understand. That was my husband. And he was surprised at this. This time, this lady was a man, or this man was a lady. This man was
a woman, yeah. Dude looks like a lady.
Is there any...
or lady looks like a dude.
I think... And that's what I'm asking you, Tim. There's in Hayes maybe account, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there's after the war, and I know that one of our friends, Ed Guy, cites this story a lot. That in the Louisiana Tigers, after the war, there's a lady who says, "Yes, I was at the Battle of Gettysburg as one of the Louisiana Tigers."
Okay, and how about General Hayes of the Union Army?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Different Hayes.
There's an account that after Pickett's charge, they find the bodies of 2 women on the battlefield, dressed as Confederate soldiers. Yeah, I think it was 2.
Oh,
yes. But again, it's just a reference that hey, somebody showed me some bodies, and I think there were women.
So there's no detail, this is how we know, or nothing, anything like that.
Nothing that we can actually research.
But you could find out from this late in history.
I think this is researching subjects where you're not going to find evidence to prove it is something that, is really difficult. This same thing can be said for young soldiers in the battle. Oh, this kid was,
10 years old,
or 12 years older.
Yeah.
Or, everybody who joins the Army is 18. They're lying about their age. Well, how do I prove they're lying about their age?
Right.
Who is the youngest kid killed in the battle or wounded in the battle? It's really difficult to ascertain some of this information.
Okay, so she also wants to know, would there be anyone able to answer why the Union and Confederate soldiers were fighting in New Mexico? And just also to add this here, also I'm using your podcast for history lessons in our home school. Our family is part of a reenactment group here in Arizona, and one of the things we do is a skirmish between North and South. It has really piqued the interest of our 10-year-old. What in particular do the guides recommend I should stress about the Civil War? So there's 2 questions there. Why were they fighting in Arizona? And what should she stress about the Civil War to her 10-year-old? And by the way, thank you, Mrs. Maestas, for having this as a part of your homeschooling curriculum. Go ahead, Bob.
One thing I would say is get to the Santa Fe area, the Pecos National Historic Site. I was there, maybe 16, 17 years ago. And the Battle of Glorieta Pass is somewhat preserved, not like it is here at Gettysburg. This is considered the Gettysburg of the West, a turning point battle in the fight out way, way west. So
it's not as big as Gettysburg.
Not nearly as big as Gettysburg. We're talking about 2 small brigades size, maybe 900 and 1,100 men for each side, maybe 1,300, 1,100 men for each side. To get to the first thing first, the Confederates are very interested in the mineral resources in the West, the far west, silver, gold that's been discovered in Colorado and out in California. Also, as a way perhaps to circumvent the Union naval blockade, if they could have ports in Southern California, they could get some supplies they're hoping for. There's also always the thing where the South wanted to extend slavery to the West, and so there's some interest for the South to be fighting there. To that end, General Sibley, a Confederate general, is going to leave the El Paso area in late 1861, probably 1862, early, like January, February, and he's going to march from that area up the Rio Grande River, heading towards the Santa Fe area. And the Battle of Glorieta Pass is fought just a little bit southeast of Santa Fe. Union commander at Fort Union there, Gettysburg's own Gabriel Paul, who here at Gettysburg was hit in the left eye and ended up blind and couldn't smell very well. His senses of hearing as well as smell were also severely diminished, but the poor guy. But he was there at Fort Union.
Basically three of his five senses
were from that bullet
up.
that hit his left eye at Gettysburg on Oak Ridge on July 1st, part of Robinson's division of the First Corps. Anyway, he was at Fort Union, and a number of volunteers that had been raised from Colorado, I think there were 3 different Colorado units, had come down to fight for the Union. And one of them was the famous, at this point, he was Major John Shivington, but he'll be Colonel John Shivington a little more than 2 years later at the Sand Creek Massacre in Colorado. Part of a different war, but a very, very sad story. Any event, so the Confederates are coming up towards Santa Fe, and they are going to be going over the Glorieta Pass. This is part of the old Santa Fe Trail. It's been for thousands of years, literally, a passage through the southern part of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and the Santa Fe Trails going over there as well. And so you got the Confederates approaching from the west, and coming from Fort Union from the east, there is this force of Coloradan and northern soldiers, and they are going to meet in late March. I think it was March 26th, 27th, and 28th in this Gettysburg of the West battle. Originally, there's some success at a fight called Apache Canyon, and the Union forces are going to have some success, but the Confederates have others coming up, and 2 days later, there's no major fighting in the middle day, but 2 days later, the Confederates, thinking they have the advantage, are going to leave their supply train way in their rear near this place called Johnson's Ranch. And they are going to push the Federals further east in this fight that's taking place near Pigeon Ranch. In any event, while this big fight is going on, the Confederates have done a poor job of protecting their supply train. Major Shivington, with about 450 men, this is about 1/3 of the Union force at the battle, have gone on I think it was about a 13-mile trip to the south of the Santa Fe Trail along this mesa, and they have a native scout helping them. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but they find themselves about, I think it's 700 feet above the Confederate supply train, some 70 wagons. But the problem is, how do they get down this 700-foot cliff? And they're using ropes and belts, and the Union forces literally, it's quite a feat of courage as well as physical feat. They lower themselves all the way down. Oh my God. And they scatter the few Confederate guards that were there, kill or release a lot of the horses that the Confederates had there, and burn their supplies.
Wow.
So when the Confederate forces that were fighting further to the east get word, and they were pretty much victorious, they're pushing the Yankees back, when they get word that, oh my gosh, our supplies are gone and we're out here in this deserty kind of area, right, they're the ones who are going to have to retreat. And so it kind of ends the Confederate attempts to take the Rio Grande River and head north all the way up into Colorado. Maybe, we don't know if that's where they were really going to get to, but they're trying to win victories in the West. Wow. There is a great book. It's been a long time since I've read it, though, so I'm not sure I'm recommending it for your homeschool class, but P.G. Nagel in 1999 wrote a novel called Glorieta Pass, and you might want to read that, Mom, and see if it's something that would be appropriate for your kids, too.
Also, you could, if you want to talk about the war in the West, you could watch the movie. This gets back to the last podcast you did, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Oh, yes, yes.
Which is a really bad movie.
It is.
Does that describe the three of us? Tim would be the good.
I better not be the ugly.
I'll be the bad then.
Damn it. No, I'm always the ugly.
I'll be the ugly. I don't mind that. I'd rather be ugly than bad.
Something I'd point out that's kind of interesting about, people in the Midwest is, I think a lot of times people in the West think that Civil War is an Eastern thing.
Yeah.
And of course, that's obvious that people in Virginia or people in Pennsylvania think more about the Civil War because we have Civil War battlefields around us and we talk about it a lot more. Just like the American Revolution is discussed much more in Boston than we talk about it down here.
Right.
But, the causes of the Civil War are deeply rooted in the Western expansion of the United States. And so in a general sense, in American history, sometimes we refer to the American Civil War as growing pains. As the country expands westward, a lot of the causes that led to the outbreak of war between the northern and southern states were deeply rooted in the Western expansion. For instance, if we talk about the causes of the war and somebody wants to talk about the cause of the war. No one loves to talk about Civil War politics more than I do, pre-Civil War politics. I don't like to talk about politics today, but boy, do I love to talk about politics in the 1850s. My favorite subject is like the know-nothings. But I would say, and you could take a college course on this, and it would take a long time to discuss it, but I would say the cause of the Civil War is the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. So I think a lot of times people get upset with historians because they're like, well, the war wasn't about slavery. It was about this or it was about that. It wasn't about slavery. But I think when people say that, what they're objecting to is the idea that we might suggest that the war was about the morality of slavery.
Right.
That the North didn't want slavery, the South wanted slavery, and we're fighting about what is good and bad over morality. But really, we're not. When we talk about the war being about slavery, what historians are discussing is the war being about the expansion of slavery into the Western territories as not just a moral issue, but an economic issue. And of course, the expansion of the West hinges a lot on the idea of the Transcontinental Railroad moving westward, and whether that railroad is going to go from Chicago across the Nebraska territory towards California, or whether the South are able to get that railroad to swing south through New Orleans and across. And, the settlement of the Western territories is important for the North and the South. And that's why, Stephen Douglas's Kansas-Nebraska Act was so controversial. Basically, Stephen Douglas is selling out the Missouri Compromise because he wants the Nebraska and Kansas-Nebraska territories opened up for settlement so that he can get that railroad from Chicago across, and he's willing to sell out the territories in the South to popular sovereignty, whether those states are going to come into the Union as slave states or as free states. And so, from a perspective of someone that lives in the West, Arizona, it's interesting that these issues over the territory that we recently acquired from Mexico, or is this going to be, these places going to be open up to slavery? Now, you might argue that, that it's not profitable to have slaves in the Southwest, and that's probably the reason why there's not a lot of slavery there, because it doesn't, what are you growing there?
Right.
So, but it is a big issue at that time, and I think in the 1850s, and a lot of the problems that were created in Congress between the division over these issues of expansion eventually led to the outbreak of war. But it was a long time coming. It's very complicated. So I think, it's something that with young people you can address, the complicated factors and try to make. Of course, we have to make these things simple to understand.
Right.
That's also why when people talk about the causes of Civil War, people talk about slavery so much, because it's a simple answer.
Right.
To a very, very, very complicated issue.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a couple more fun ones here. S.J. Colmus writes, what is the strangest or most hilarious question you've been asked by a visitor?
Should I go? So for me, and of course, from each of the podcasts I've talked about, that I do a lot of tours with 8th graders.
Yeah.
So obviously a lot of things that happen to me are going to be,
childish, coming
from 8th graders. Yeah, childish. But I think sometimes you get a question that makes you think.
Okay.
And 8th graders, I've been asked this more than once. Mr. Smith, where do soldiers go to the bathroom?
I would ask the same question, Tim.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Did he actually take a break? Go behind the lines, dig a hole in the ground? How does that all work? Mm-hmm. I used to tell him something like, don't worry about it. If you're in a battle and you're scared to death, that kind of thing will take care of itself.
That's why they use the brown pants, right?
It's like, these are good questions. But, seriously, I know that I'll give you a couple of questions that I've had. And I know that when I say this, people think I'm kidding, but each of these things I've had happen to me multiple times.
Okay.
For instance, the question has been raised to me in all seriousness. These people are not kidding. Did they put the monuments in storage in the winter?
Okay, good one.
Why are all the battlefields on national park property?
Okay, another good one.
That I've been asked that several times. Did they put the monuments up to mark the spots where the units would then stand?
Oh, you've had that too. Good. I thought that was unique to me. Nope. I'm glad to hear someone else had that.
So they put the monuments up before the battle so that the units would know where they were to stand.
Because it was a game. It was just a prepared game.
So, and then two questions I get a lot, or I've had multiple times. Were the rocks here during the battle?
Why is that a question? I've heard that from you and Jesse and Tim.
I don't know.
It is a true question, and they're serious. And then, you have to be serious when you answer it. But boy, sometimes I want to say no. There was the Confederate Rock Brigade, and they had wagons of rocks they brought from the South, and then they placed the rocks on the battlefield. And then the question
as obstacles to the Union Army.
Yeah. That's what the pioneers did. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Now the question I get, and again, this is from people from Arizona or California. Now you have to realize that we'll have visitors that have been in California all their life, and they're like, "Wow, I got to see that battlefield of Gettysburg." So they fly in, they drive here, and one fall day I was riding around, and this guy was like, "Stop for a minute, stop. What is this on the ground over here?" I'm like, "What? This right here?" I'm like, "What?" He says, "That stuff." I'm like, a pile of leaves? I'm like, they fall off the trees? What?
What? Where was he from in California?
I don't know. He didn't know anything about leaves or the existence of leaves.
Having moved here from California, I don't know about that. I mean, I believe you, Tim, but that's kind of hard.
Yeah,
for me, Tim's already taken most of them, but I can remember once I was giving a tour to a group of kids, 8th graders from California, and we were over by what can I say, Stone Avenue, but that's not going to mean much to most people. The McPherson's Ridge, where the McPherson's barn is, and just to the west there's cows. Yeah, and this one kid points to the cows and says, "Hey, mister, are those real cows?" I'm thinking you've spent too many years at Disneyland or something. But yeah, they're real cows.
Animatronic cows.
Yeah.
Speaking of the cow thing, I have to tell you that, I guess you said you were going to segue into this, but embarrassing things that have happened on tours.
Okay.
So I was going around, I guess about 3 years ago, I was coming off the Chambersburg Pike and going onto Stone Avenue on the first day's battlefield. There's cows.
Same cows
off in the field, and I always point to the cows, and I'm usually at that point I'm segueing into the National Military Park. They try to keep the battlefield looking as it did at the time of the battle. There are fields where fields would have been, and there are cows where cows would have grazed, and I point to the cows. There was a cow laying on the ground, all 4 feet in the air.
That's awesome.
It's one of my most embarrassing study moments.
That's great.
I got a thank you letter from a bunch of elementary school kids. We don't have a whole lot of elementary school kids come here as much as 8th grade. But I got a thank you letter once from a kid who said, "Thank you very much for the tour, but my teacher said you could not possibly have been alive during the Civil War." And I'm thinking, kid, I didn't say that. I said I was alive when that guy over there, I'm pointing to Albert Wilson, who died in 1956. I was alive when he was alive. I wasn't alive during the Civil War.
Yeah.
I must have looked really old to that guy.
But that's the thing that came up when we had Jesse Weedleton on, and that is that, you might say something out on a tour and you could be absolutely correct, but that doesn't mean people are processing it correctly. Correct. And then they go home thinking something else and confusing things. And then that's just a very human thing.
Sometimes they ask questions because you said something that they didn't quite process.
Right.
I know that one of the tour guides liked to talk about Archer's Brigade all the time. And you know, there was something that he was saying that was an unusual way he would say it. And he kept getting the question, you know, you'd always talk about this, that people thought there were bows and arrows at the battle. Yeah. Because, you know, something he wasn't making clear.
Right.
Sometimes it's our fault. You know, we have to admit, sometimes it's our fault when the person asks a question because we say something.
That's like when we were talking about markers and monuments and stuff. Like there's the way that people who are around this stuff all the time talk about it, and we know what we're talking about. But then to the newbie, especially somebody who, you know, has only visited here once, it gets very overwhelming. You looking around at all of the things that there are to look at, all the markers and monuments and tablets and all this stuff, and you're like, what the hell's the difference between all these things? It's a lot. And so yeah, I can see how that goes. All right. Yeah.
I was just going to say with the rocks, like we're riding along, there's rock walls built by farmers.
Right.
And then we get to Devil's Den. Is that, well, who did that?
Oh.
You know, I mean.
Oh, okay. Right. I see. I never thought
That's
of that.
Keeping in the really big cows there.
Yeah. Well, when they were trying to make the stone walls, they would come across these really big ones, so they all just took them and piled them down there at Devil's Den. Okay, well, who was the most famous person that you've taken on a tour, and what was the tour like? As diplomatically as you can.
I'll go first with that one. I think I might have relayed this before, but Congressman at the time, Arthur Ravenel from Charleston, South Carolina. It was my very first year that Park had asked me to give a tour to this man. I thought I must be doing a good job. Why would he be asking me? And then within seconds after meeting the man, I realized I was the rookie and no one else wanted to give this tour. He chooses to tell me that he can see Fort Sumter from his front door, and he's telling me something there, that he's coming from a rich and powerful class of people.
Yeah.
And it said, I have visited every battlefield of the war between the states. He's using that term out of deference to me. I'm sure he would have wanted to say the War of Northern Aggression. Yeah. But he says, I visited every battlefield of the war between the states, but I've never mustered the courage to come to this one. And I'm thinking, why do you need courage to come to a place 128 years after the fight? I will say this for Congressman Ravenel. He was a wonderful man, and he got the place. He got the spirit of the place. He was moved by it. At one point, we're at the wheat field, and he's welling up in tears because Kershaw's Brigade, South Carolinians, his people, were hit there. And he will say, that damn Lincoln started this all. And
it's still very real to a lot of people.
Oh, yeah, it was to him.
Down there.
So he's probably the most famous I'm aware of giving a tour to. But, yeah.
How about you, Tim?
Well, you know, I'm a consultant for Civil War Trust. And Civil War Trust often does, tours with congressmen. So I've taken a lot of congressmen around the battlefield on tours. I took Senator Jeffords from Vermont on a tour of the battlefield for what's now called American Battlefield Trust. And he, at the time I took him on the tour, it was very controversial because he's the one who shifted from a Republican to a Democrat. And he was really interested in, I told him the Stephen Brown story at Vermont, and he got his picture taken with Stephen Brown. So that was his favorite story. Now, some people might know it. Some people might not know it. I'm from Baltimore, and Brian Gumbel used to have a show on cable. I forget the name of the show, but it was a sports show. And I was chosen to take Jim Harbaugh and John Harbaugh on a battlefield tour.
Oh, that's right. When the coaches of the 49ers and the Ravens.
Of course, the 49ers and the Ravens, brother against brother in the Super Bowl, and they wanted to do a brother versus brother thing.
Oh, okay.
And so I took them on the battlefield tour. The name of the show.
For Brian Gumbel's show?
It was called Real Sports.
Oh, yeah, I remember Real Sports.
Real Sports. And the segment ended up being about 7 or 8 minutes, and I'm in it like 3 or 4 times. But when they came to the Farnsworth House. We ate at the Farnsworth House. They were interviewed there. They interviewed their father, their parents too. So I had the parents on the tour also, Jack, and then Jim and John, and we took them around the battlefield, and I stopped at different locations. I got to pick where we were going, about a 3-hour tour, and we talked about the battle. So I gave them a tour of the battle, and it's one of my greatest moments because, of course, I'm a Baltimore Ravens fan.
Right. And Hayes is from where?
Alexander Hayes is from Pittsburgh. And I got to tell my Alexander Hayes story.
And for those of you who don't know, the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers hate each other.
Yeah.
Right.
So I get to tell my Steelers story that I tell all the time on tours in front of John Harbaugh. And since, and I'll tell it just since we're on it here, is that after Pickett's charge, Alexander Hayes, who's from Sewickley near Pittsburgh, gathers up the battle flags captured by his men and ties Confederate battle flags to the stirrups of his horse, where he drags the Confederate battle flags and he rides up and down in front of the Southern lines, trampling the Southern dead and dragging the Confederate battle flags in the fine tradition of Pittsburgh sportsmanship. And boy, did he love it. But they didn't show that on camera.
Of course not.
Of course, I've had...
As a Cleveland Browns fan, Tim, pox on both of your houses.
So I've also had, actors on the tour. Occasionally that happens. Sometimes you have an actor. Sometimes it takes you a while to figure it out. I had a bit actor. I hate to say that in case he hears it, but I forget his name.
Yes, because all of Hollywood is listening to this show.
Yeah. Oh yes. But I had an actor, and he had been in a Columbo episode that I really liked, and he was the star of a show called Moving On with Chet Atkins, and I forget his name. But I also had, and I'll forget her name, I had one of the Waltons on the tour.
Okay.
Not the oldest daughter, but like the second oldest daughter.
John Girl?
That's good. But, and then, occasionally somebody will come and we'll do tours. But in the visitor center, the Battle of Gettysburg obviously is an interest which crosses all lines.
Sure.
You never know who's really interested in the Battle of Gettysburg and who is not. Oh, I had Radar O'Reilly. What's his name?
I know who you're talking about.
Gary Berghoff.
Gary Berghoff.
Yeah.
Gary Berghoff's daughter.
Yeah.
Ran a bicycle company in the town of Gettysburg.
That's where I got the bikes from.
You may have bought.
Yeah, I bought all of them.
Her father, that's Gary Berghoff's daughter.
Yeah.
And so she ran a tour company in town, and of course I did bike tours for them. And, Gary Berghoff came to town. Oh, Ernest Borgnine.
Ernie.
Yeah, Ernest Borgnine came to Gettysburg. He actually was good friends with Van Nitz. Dwight Van Nitz, who was a tour guide.
Okay.
And so I didn't actually give him a tour, but we hung out a little bit.
I seem to remember you having, and I don't know if you want to share these, but I seem to remember you having these good stories about when they were making the movie.
Oh yeah, well I mean,
the Farnsworth
if you want
house.
to count that, I hung out with Sam Elliott and Tom Berenger, and
who's the better drinker?
Wow, I don't remember a night where Tom Berenger and Sam Elliott were sitting together, because obviously, they had Confederate actors in the movie and Union actors in the movie, and at different times. There was a time where both sets of actors were together, but I don't remember them having a contest. I would not want to be part of that contest.
No.
But Tom Berenger and Sam Elliott were both in the Farnsworth house, multiple times, and I had great conversations with both of them. And then my favorite person from the movie was James Lancaster,
the guy who played
Fremantle.
Yeah,
we were kind of buddies and hung out a little while.
Okay.
And then Brian Mullen, who played Hancock. We hung out a lot during the filming. And
he's an interesting guy, Brian Mullen.
Yeah,
because I hung out with him a little bit last year, and
he came back for the 25th anniversary of the movie of Gettysburg.
Yeah, so that's where I hung out.
And he came to the Farnsworth house too.
Yeah, he was interesting. And then we interviewed Bo Brinkman and Patrick Gorman, and they had some pretty good stories too about the.
Bo Brinkman.
They loved. Everybody had a great time when they came here.
Bo Brinkman, he used to hang at the Farnsworth house also, and I knew him, and Patrick Gorman. He was great. So, we met other, it's funny that when you ask the question, I didn't even think about those guys as being famous, because, they came and we hung out and I knew them.
They don't act like they're people who are in a movie that, tons of people love.
I was going to say, on a regular basis in the visitor center, we'll see stars or somebody who's famous coming up. And obviously we have lots of generals that come through in the military service, lots and lots of colonels bring their units to Gettysburg, and officers that you know of and you've heard of. And then I saw Alex Trebek in the visitor center.
Really?
He's a big Civil War buff. I wanted to go up to him and tell him there was no shoe factory in Gettysburg, but I didn't. And then you might remember a couple times in the visitor center, Alan Alda has been in the visitor center. He's a big Civil War buff, I'd imagine.
Interesting. I did not know that.
So,
all right.
But do we?
Yeah, I already mentioned.
You got yours. Yeah. All right. What is the worst thing that has happened on the job? Worst thing to you, not to other people.
Well, to me, there are lots of things happen that are funny, and even something that's bad that happens to me, I'll laugh about. That's
the only way to get through it. Just
the other day, the last bus tour I gave to my high school.
Oh. To your high school that you went to.
Westminster High in Westminster, Maryland.
Okay.
And a friend of mine is a teacher there. I went to school with him, and now he teaches the class that we took when we went to high school together. So he really doesn't have an advanced very far in life at all. But no, he thinks it's great. I've always given the tour to my same class. So anyway, I was on the tour, and somebody mentioned somebody's name, and they were making fun of the name. And I was like, well, when Mr. Bowersox and I went to school together, we had a gym teacher, and I mentioned his name, which is a very humorous name. I don't know if I should say it here. And Mr. Bowersox is waving his hands at me like, stop.
Oh, he's on the bus?
No, his grandson was on the bus.
Of course.
With the same name.
My goodness.
I was picking fun of his name.
Did he catch you in time, Tim?
No, he didn't get me in time. I embarrassed myself. So embarrassing things happen to you. But I think for guys, I don't know about Bob, but for guys, stressful things can happen.
Yeah.
That impact like your day, like you have to give multiple tours or like I know in a car one time I backed into a rock and scratched the people's car, and because you're driving sometimes. Yeah. Do
you have to have your own insurance, like special insurance for this?
Yeah, well, usually to put a rider in your insurance clause.
Okay.
Yeah,
don't whisper it in the microphone.
but things happen that are out of your control. And you're responsible for the safety of a group of people on the bus. Like I've been on the bus where you have to give directions to the bus driver.
Yeah.
And the bus driver runs a red light.
Yeah.
And you don't want to slap the bus driver or call him an idiot because you're on the microphone with the rest of the people on the bus. You probably don't want the rest of the people on the bus to know that you're concerned that the driver's not doing a good job.
Right, because they got to go home with them.
But what happens is you're on the bus and you realize early in the tour that the bus driver doesn't know how to drive. Mm-hmm. And then the whole rest of the tour, you're concerned about the safety of the group as well as the people on the bus. And then you're right. I'm going to get off the bus and I'm going to have to ride across the turnpike with this guy.
Right.
So things like that are, I think, worst things that happen to me are like stressful. The other things that happen, I can laugh about. Now, one of our tour guides this past year, you probably know, maybe you've mentioned on podcast before.
Yeah, we've alluded to it.
There was a kid from Indiana, an 8th grader, and on the Pennsylvania Monument, he actually climbed over the monument out onto the ledge and then slipped and then fell.
Yeah.
Like 60 feet. And he had to be airlifted to Hershey. So I know other guys, I haven't had this happen, but have had kids seriously injured on their tour. And depending on
Devil's Den.
Yeah, Devil's Den. It depends how it happens, but sometimes you feel like you're the tour leader and you're the one responsible for it. So,
Yeah, it's the Pennsylvania Monument thing, I couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
I was like, who the hell would let the kids run roughshod like that? I'm not talking about the tour guide, I'm talking about the chaperones of that.
Yeah,
because that was a school trip.
In this case, it was a once. It doesn't occur that often. And he did it on the back side of the monument out of the view of the teachers. And according to the kids on the tour, he climbed over and he was hiding, he's hunkering down and then raising himself up and scaring people. And then, and then he just lost grip. And so it's a stupid thing that he did.
It just aggravates me because I could totally see myself doing that when I was that age.
I could see you doing that now, Matt.
All right, you got me. I could do it now. But
you have to be clear to the 8th graders and tell them what they're not allowed to do.
Right. Oh, yeah, you do. You can't assume that people know. Don't go on the other side of the wall.
Like, I'm really clear when we get to Devil's Den, before we get to Devil's Den, and I usually joke about it, but I don't want them picking up snakes. And they will. If you see a snake, if you don't tell them not to, one of the 8th graders will run over and grab it.
Why?
Because they're 8th graders.
God, that's disgusting. I hate snakes.
Think outside the bus and let Getty's Bike Tours show you the only way to truly experience Gettysburg. There's a reason why Getty's Bike Tours is the longest running bicycle tour company in Gettysburg, and that's because they put the customer's experience at the top of their list of priorities. Follow a licensed battlefield guide through some of the most legendary ground in American history. There's a tour route for everyone, from the newbie to the hardcore history buff. So go to gettysbike.com or call 717-752-7752 and book your reservation today. Mention Addressing Gettysburg and receive 10% off your tour. That's gettysbike.com or 717-752-7752. Discount does not apply to rentals.
Hey everybody, we're back. Ask a Gettysburg guide number 4. C-Wit asks, how instrumental in the outcome of the battle were Berdan's U.S. sharpshooters at Pitzer's Run?
I think there's, I think in the bigger scheme of things, when people look at the story of the battle, if there is a unit that they are, maybe had a relative in, or a unit that they're interested in, they seem to build up the role of that unit in the battle. And I guess there's a couple ways to look at the reconnaissance of the Berdan sharpshooters on the morning of July 2nd. But basically, General Sickles, 3rd Army Corps, is ordered to send men out to see where the left flank or the southern extension of the Southern Army is in the early morning of the second day of the battle. Obviously, they occupied Seminary Ridge from the Lutheran Seminary down in the area west of...
Bob has to go. Thanks, Bob. Sorry, Tim. Go ahead.
In the area west of the town, and their line, they can look over the Northern Army and see them on that ridge, but they're not sure exactly how far down they extend. And at the point in the mid-morning of July 2nd, when this reconnaissance is sent out there, some of the Berdan sharpshooters along with the 3rd Maine Infantry, they are sent out onto, what we call Warfield or Seminary Ridge out near what is now West Confederate Avenue, and they swing around and march north through the woods near the Samuel Pitzer farm and hit the end of General Anderson's divisional line, and primarily Wilcox's Alabama Brigade. The Southern Army doesn't extend down as far as it will when they launched their attack at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Right. And there's a fight between the Berdan sharpshooters and the 3rd Maine Infantry and Wilcox's Alabama Brigade in the area we're talking about now, between what is the what is the Florida Monument and the area just south of it, which we refer to as Pitcher's Woods, where the park has an amphitheater. And there's also
a monument to the 3rd Maine. And
there's a monument to some of the United States sharpshooters and the 3rd Maine in the woods along Confederate Avenue, a little avenue that goes down to these monuments. And there is a brigade plaque that marks the location of Cadamus Wilcox's brigade. By the way, one of the coolest Civil War names, Cadamus,
yeah.
So there is a fight there, and then that information is brought back to the Union High Command that the Southern Army only extends down the ridge so far. In the end, did this information really help the Northern Army? Because in a few hours, General Longstreet's force, McLaws' division, and Hood's division will move into position and take up the position beyond Anderson's division. So all they really established is early in the morning, the end of the Confederate line is around the Spangler, farm, and doesn't extend that far down the ridge. And then, this information will be obsolete in a couple hours when Longstreet moves into position. So I don't know that the skirmish actually affected any of the later events in the day.
Right.
So it's an interesting footnote and sidelight in the battle. And, all these things are interesting to us, these actions that occur, these obscure actions. But I think one of the things that happens is after the war, Longstreet is talking to Sickles about this. I think there's some information about this, and Longstreet alludes to the fact that this reconnaissance, unscreened his movement, or that somehow this, like, they knew they were coming,
right?
But it really didn't have anything to do with that.
Is that according to Sickles, this story?
I think so. It's been, we read so many books and so much information, keep track of it. But yeah, sometimes the story is blown out of proportion. Maybe also Hiram Burdine, who is involved in it, wants to make it a little more interesting or exciting.
Tyler Fast History would like to know if there are any good firsthand accounts from Benning's Brigade on the second day.
I wrote a book called Devil's Den. And Benning's Brigade plays a large role in the battle. I know we use the official reports of Benning's Brigade, which you can find online to write that. But in a general sense, I don't remember there being a good history of Benning's Brigade itself. Or, of course, Henry Lewis Benning is from Columbus, Georgia. Mm-hmm. And I was down there just this past summer, and I wanted to visit his grave. I didn't get a chance to visit his grave. But, of course, Fort Benning in Columbus, Georgia is named after General Benning. And I always find it interesting, Benning's name is Rock. His nickname.
Rock Benning.
Yeah, like Rock Hudson.
I like that. Yeah.
But I think with some of these Confederate units, there's not a lot of primary source material that you can just go to one source and read about Benning's Brigade.
So no journals or letters that we know of?
You have to put together the individual accounts that have been collected of the people in that unit. And I think in the book we cite a bunch of different guys in the unit that have reminiscence or diaries or letters. I remember in Benning's Brigade, we got a grouping of letters from with Emory College, and is that somewhere in Georgia? I don't remember if it's in Atlanta.
I don't know.
Don't know. Somebody, I'm sure on the internet, your listeners will figure it out. But you can look in our footnotes in our book and see where we got stuff on Benning's Brigade from. But we didn't get it from one place. We got it from a whole bunch of different firsthand sources. But having said that, Benning and Benning's Brigade, they do a really good job on the second day of the battle. And, at the point that they arrived at the base of Houck's Ridge near Devil's Den from their advance on Seminary Ridge, the Alabamians and Texans are struggling on Little Round Top, or struggling through the woods to advance up that hill. And Texas and Alabama troops are struggling in the rocks of Devil's Den. And Benning arrives on the field. Hood is wounded. Law has gone to take command, but is not in any kind of position. Robertson, who's a brigade commander, has Texans at Devil's Den and Texans on Little Round Top. He's somewhere between. He's nowhere to be found. Henry Benning pulls together parts of 3 brigades from 4 different states and is able to coordinate a massive attack on Devil's Den. And he's the one who's largely responsible for overrunning the northern position and capturing Devil's Den. And then it's also Benning and his brigade who, after the capture of Devil's Den, decide not to join in the attack on Little Round Top.
Right.
And Benning does a good job in his official report of explaining that, they've lost a lot of men. He looks over at Little Round Top and, man, it looks like it's just too formidable. And he decides to hold on to Devil's Den, create a defensive position, and not continue the attacks. And of course, we look at that as a pivotal moment in the battle for the second day where, the tide starts to turn and the Southerners are defeated on Little Round Top and, eventually held back from the line from Devil's Den to the wheat field to the peach orchard.
Yeah.
And, if Benning would have made the attack on Little Round Top, would have continued on across the Valley of Death and up the slopes of the hill, we don't know what would have happened.
Right.
And maybe it just would have been more dead Confederates on Little Round Top. But by not making the attack, it started the tide to be turned.
Calming down of the attack, yeah. Well, Tim, I know you got to get going, and there's only a few questions that we missed, so we're going to table those questions for the next Ask a Guide. So if you didn't get your question asked, don't worry about it. We're going to keep it, and we'll do it next time. But thank you all for listening, and hope you have a happy holidays. You probably won't hear from us until after the holidays. So thank you, Tim. Thank you, Bob, in absentia, and thank you for listening. Okay.
Yeah, I hope we did it.
We are good.